Although apartheid didn't officially commence until 1948, the oppression of the native South Africans had been occurring for decades. The conflict began when the Boers arrived and colonized South Africa in the 1800s. But the first political groups didn't start to emerge until after it was declared an independent union. During this time, two groups that would later form the United Party, the National Party and the South African Party, emerged. The National Party would eventually initiate the system of apartheid in South Africa. Meanwhile, the ANC was also founded to fight discrimination against the native Africans in South Africa. The first independent legislation to control the native population was enacted in 1913 and denied natives the right to purchase land outside of their reserves. World War I accelerated urbanization, and legislations barred blacks from living in urban areas and from holding skilled jobs. However, there were minor reforms made in World War II, but the liberal stance of the United Party, the current government, caused people to break off and instead give support to the now separate and conservative National Party.
Apartheid began in 1948 after the National Party won elections and started as a collection of specific laws that separated people into different groups based on their race. After the initial set of laws, more were implemented that separated different races further. Other laws were also put in place that discriminated against specific races. For example, the Bantu Education Act of 1953 separated students by race, and then they were taught a specific curriculum. Finally, more laws were passed that heightened penalties for opposing or protesting against any laws, mainly the Public Safety Act of 1953, which increased the penalties for protesting against or supporting the repeal of a law. In 1960, the African National Congress was banned. In 1964, following the banning of the ANC, Nelson Mandela and several other ANC officials were charged with life imprisonment. The CIA assisted the South African government in finding Nelson Mandela. He was then arrested for high treason against the state. These laws lasted for several decades. Then, in the 1980s, the National Party started to be criticized for apartheid by the international community. This brought about the official end of apartheid in 1990.
Mandela and other ANC leaders were released from prison in 1990, and the ANC was legalized in response to sanctions from countries such as the United States. Then, in 1991, the remaining apartheid legislations were abolished, and Mandela was elected president in 1994. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was founded in 1995, and this was a group of people that allowed victims of the apartheid to testify and tell their stories. Also, perpetrators of violence could testify and request amnesty from prosecution. But the apartheid has had many lasting effects on South Africa. Many people each year die to HIV and AIDS, and the crime rate is very high. Also, the majority of the suburbs around cities are shanty towns, and many people are impoverished. Recently, the FIFA World Cup was held in South Africa. The event increased tourism and the nation's self-respect, but now the stadiums are rarely used, and the large costs resulted in high taxes. Overall, South Africa has changed since the time of the apartheid, even though they recently mourned the death of Nelson Mandela in 2013.